A witch hunt at San Diego City Hall. Good evening, I'm Michael Marcotte. Let's look at the top stories of the week. We'll dwell on City Hall action again this week as the blame game continues over the San Diego fiscal and legal crisis, and officials thought up new ways to raise revenues. To help us explore all of that, our San Diego Union-Tribune reporter Jennifer Vigil on the pension crisis, and KPBS reporter Alison St John with updates on the mayor's race and the city budget. We also have with us tonight UT reporter Michael Kinsman with the story behind the suburban janitor strike. And here is Tony Perry of the Los Angeles Times to add some surprise information to the base closure process. We'll start with the pension crisis. A 1996 memo was identified this week that's ruffled some feathers, and Jennifer Vigil has been doing the reporting on this. What's the most damning thing about this memo, Jennifer?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. Michael Aguirre says the 1996 draft memo is evidence of fraud. It was written by Larry Grissom, the pension fund administrator, to his board president at the time, a former top official at the police department, and it frequently mentions what appears to be the seeds of the idea that became the underfunding plan that has ruffled everyone's feathers about the pension fund.
Well, we've already seen some charges coming out of the DA's office relating to the pension fund planning activity and the deal to raise benefits and underfund the system. Is this foreshadowing more charges against earlier members of the fund?
Well, Mike Aguirre has said that this memo is evidence of fraud. He's particularly concerned about two portions of the memo that discuss how the plan will be perceived and how the officials should strategize to make the plan acceptable. Now, if you talk to Larry Grissom, he said that there was no intent to deceive anyone by the use of the word strategize. He just said that they needed to fully form the plan, to present it to outside lawyers and outside fiduciary counsel. But other people I've shown the memo to are pretty uncomfortable with that language. But I must also say that Jack McGrory, who reviewed the memo for me, said that
former city manager
said that there were talks back and forth with the pension board all the time. It was not unusual, and he dismissed Aguirre's allegations.
But does this suggest that what we've been focusing on in 2002 with the conflict of interest, the quid pro quo, was actually standard practice, business as usual, and started a lot earlier?
Well, like McGrory said, and actually it was interesting because Michael Conger, who has won a lawsuit against the pension fund, said that in terms of specifically Larry Grissom, he appears to be a small player in all this. But if you talk to the city attorney's office, the city manager's office, these talks were going back and forth for years. And in fact, they'd actually been going on for a couple years prior to 1996 when the underfunding was first approved.
And what again is wrong with the city manager's office talking with the pension board people? What is there supposed to be? Seriously, is there supposed to be a firewall? They shall never speak, or what is the Aguirre allegation on this point?
Well, that's what Mike Aguirre believes. He said that Larry Grissom, the administrator of the pension fund, should solely be looking after the interests of the pension fund and not thinking about the interests of the city.
That's interesting. Now, there are some pretty big differences between 96 and 2002 because that pension fund was just raking in the dough with the stock market shooting through the roof, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so, I mean, McGrory saw a lot of money sitting there and thought maybe you could help solve some budget issues at City Council?
Much of the focus has been 2002 because at that point, of course, the stock market was not doing so well, and there were clearly signs that the fund was starting to be in trouble.
But do you think that should affect the legality of something, the fact that the strategy was the same, but the market conditions were different? I mean, does that mean that what actually happened, in 96 was okay, and 2002 was not okay?
Well, Michael Aguirre is making the distinction at this point that he sees fraud in 1996. That 2002 is not the only problem.
Do we have any indication that lawyers in 96, city attorney Casey Gwynn or the private attorneys that were involved?
It was not Casey Gwynn at that point. It was John Witt. It was an administration prior.
Any indication that any flags were raised that what you're doing is illegal? Not just maybe bad policy, questionable policy, but actually illegal? Did they waive off legal warnings?
It doesn't appear that there were legal warnings at that point. The plan had actually been set aside in 95 because of concerns, but the flags didn't appear to, it appeared to be more of a public policy concern than actual legal concerns.
So Mike Aguirre is talking about this memo as part of this, another one of his reports, I think the sixth report that he's trotting out on the pension crisis. Do you know what the overall thrust of this sixth report his?
He's pointed to the memo as being sort of the hat rack on which he's hanging the hat for the sixth report, which could be out as soon as next week.
In other words, the early underpinnings of the underfunding crisis.
Exactly.
I see. Now, the spotlight this week was on an actuary, a guy named Rick Roeder. What is he blamed for, and how is he responding?
Well, the city has hired something they've termed an audit committee. It's 3 consultants, very highly paid. One is a former head of the SEC, and they have sent a letter to the pension board recommending that they retain a new actuary because of substantial questions about Rick Roeder's work.
Okay, and what does an actuary do?
An actuary usually stays away in the background, first of all, and handles very technical questions in terms of demographic information, financial data, to predict how a pension fund will perform in the long term, many, many years ahead of time.
Now, Rick Roeder, of course, is saying, you know, I did my job, I warned them, they just didn't listen to me. It's not my fault that these decisions were made. You have to blame the decision makers, not the actuary. I mean, do you think that the highly paid consultants are just trying to show the markets that they can get rid of somebody, and this guy might be the easiest to winkle out of the mix?
That is a good question, because all along the term that city officials and legal experts have used is remediation. The market wants to see that you are doing some corrective to get people out who have influenced the problem thus far. But the word scapegoat has been used about Roeder. In the audit committee's letter to the board, they're saying that he was unduly influenced by the CSRS board and city officials, that he should not have let any of their thoughts influence what his professional opinion was. But he said, look, I expressed my professional opinion, and the board still didn't listen.
And Roeder is using the term witch hunt. He's, you know,
McCarthyism
saying,
and witch hunt.
Is that the way things are downtown these days? Is it a witch hunt?
Well, I would say that there is a great deal of concern involved. Perhaps Alison might be able to express this too, perhaps even bordering on panic. You know, we've been in the same mode for so long, saying we need our audits, we need the pension board to release its documents, and yet nothing's happened for so long, and the investigation is still, you know, impending.
Well, we don't know where the investigation is. I mean, Carol Lam, the U.S. Attorney, she doesn't talk, and so we don't know if she's 6 inches away from an enormous indictment or 6 million miles away from nothing. So we really don't know. We're all functioning. I mean, Mike holds press conferences at the drop of a hat, and he's sort of he's out there and about. But he really is not the show. The show is Carol Lam, and we don't have a foggiest idea what Carol is up to.
And I think that's where a deep sense of the unease comes from.
Absolutely.
You also mentioned that the FBI was at the press conference with Rick Roeder, and you kind of wonder, well, are they looking to the media to find their evidence? You sort of hope they're ahead of the game, but we have heard nothing for more than a year.
It could lead you to think about that privilege question in terms of the pension board refusing to this point to waive privilege on its legal documents. And if they're not revealing those documents, perhaps the FBI has to come listen at press conferences, because the pension board just isn't giving out some crucial information.
It does seem like the spotlight is focusing more and more on the pension board now, and we have new trustees on this board now.
Yes.
But yet they too don't seem to be willing to divulge this privileged information. Would you say the pressure is mounting on the pension board?
Well, a letter came to light that we wrote about today in the paper that Councilman Scott Peters sent to the pension board last month, right after the last time when they failed to make a decision on waiving privilege on their documents. And he said, look, I have to renew my concern. You have to release these documents, and it's not just for the city's benefit. The city needs its audits done to fund, you know, our own programs, our own major projects, but we also need the audits done so we can fund you. So it's in your best interests to release these documents so we can get our financial picture in shape and bond to make sure we can afford to contribute to the fund. Well, he also took the additional step, and it's buried deep within his letter, but he said, look, if you don't make a decision soon, we might actually have to consider getting somebody to take over the board.
Scott's looking for the road of least resistance. Everybody's looking for the road of least resistance to get through this thing. Not that many weeks weeks ago, Scott Peters was talking about getting rid of KPMG, the audit company that is holding up the audit until it is absolutely satisfied on a whole panoply of items. You know, just firing them, taking the loss, bringing somebody new in, and getting another audit so that the city can get back into the market. He seems to have abandoned that, and now we're going to pressure the pension board into giving up attorney-client privilege, which is a fairly substantial privilege, and that's quite a thing that we're asking them to do. Among other things, this pension board deals not just with the City of San Diego pensions, but other agencies too. How would you like your attorney to suddenly start giving out letters that involve you because they involve somebody else too? This is not an insubstantial issue that the pension board is standing on.
And that's also something that Peter suggested in his letter. He said, look, perhaps Carol Lamb and the SEC could open up talks with the pension board about maybe they don't have to give up all their documents, just very specific documents.
I'm curious, and I'll turn to Alison on this question about how this is playing into the mayor's race. I mean, a lot of people are looking to the new mayor as you know, bringing some remediation or salvation to the city, and at least when it comes to the pension fund issue, how is this playing into the platforms of the candidates?
The pension fund issue as a whole, I guess the thing that all three of the major mainstream candidates are talking about is rolling back the benefits. They seem to think that that's something that can be the first line of defense. If you've seen Steve Francis's ad, which I don't see how you could have avoided seeing it the last few days, you know, that's number one on his strategies.
Presuming they're illegal to begin with?
Calling them illegal benefits, which I think is an assumption that is a bit of a dangerous assumption. It makes it sound like, oh, this will be really easy. Those were illegal. We'll just roll them back and we'll make, you know, $400 million.
Of course, Gary says that over and over, too, that they were illegal.
Right, but the question is, how long would it take to prove that in court? And I think for these candidates to be saying that this is a strategy that will pull the city out of its problems is really underestimating the difficulty. That's not going to, even if it did become something that was proved in court, would probably take 2 or 3 years and might cost the city a huge amount of money in litigation fees to get there.
Yeah, at the zoo we have the pandas, but I think in the mayor's race we have the pander bears. I mean, they're all pandering to the public's resentment of the public employees, jealousy, and I'm lead the band and being jealous of those pensions. I'd like one. But they're also playing into that San Diego sense of entitlement. Yes, I deserve fairly decent public services, but I don't want to pay for them. I shouldn't have to. I'm a San Diegan. I don't see one of the council or one of the mayoral would-bes standing up and saying, San Diego, we may have to start actually paying our bills. They all are looking for a way out.
I wouldn't say all,
they're looking to call the benefits illegal, like Steve Francis, based on what? I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of
based on a city attorney and a theory, although even today the Union-Tribune had an op-ed piece that said, let's not, you know, decide they're illegal quite that quickly.
That was by the union attorney, by the way.
Exactly, but it shows what has often been the case with Michael Aguirre, that he has very good theories, very passionately expressed, and when opposing attorneys stand up, they have wholly different theories, and judges have in the past, in public issues, tended to side not with Mike, but with his opponents. So it was good to get a different view in the mix. But am I wrong? Is anyone standing up and saying, San Diego, time to pay up?
I think, you know, I think you're hearing Steve Francis say no more taxes. And I think you're hearing Donna Fry say we have to share the pain. And I think you're hearing Jerry Sanders saying you'd be a fool to tell the people that there's no more taxes. Everybody is part of this, and we all have to look and see how to pull the city out.
City has on its books the potential of a real estate tax exactly to pay for pensions. I mean, the city fathers at some point decided that's how to pay for pensions, but we haven't opted to do it since the late 70s. I haven't heard anyone say, hey, we actually have a tax. I realize the difficulty of that. You wouldn't win the election this way.
Shea, of course, is using that as a threat and saying, you know, if you have a $500 million house, you could owe $64,000.
Throw our hands up and say, not that we can't pay our bills. We can. We'd rather not, thank you.
This is the bankruptcy.
Yeah, he's a bankruptcy attorney, and so he sees, oddly enough, our solution as what? Going to bankruptcy court.
Well, he's making the point, I think, that bankruptcy for a city is different from bankruptcy for an individual, and for a city it would actually protect the city. This is his argument, that rather than being something to protect the creditors, it's going to protect the city.
Not paying your bills is not paying your bills, whether you're a city or my Uncle Chick.
Well, I think, you know, it'll be interesting to see how many people, you know, feel like he's got a point, but at least I think the good thing about what Pat Shea is doing for the whole campaign is he's putting everybody else on notice. Look, you have to really come up with a realistic plan to deal with the labor unions, for example, because if you don't, maybe this is what's going to face you. So he's forcing people to be realistic.
There's a difference between being bankrupt, which Orange County was, or just being immensely consumed with buyer's remorse, which is what we have. Our politicians bought for us some pensions for other people, and we're jealous. I'm jealous, and we're having terrible buyer's remorse. Can't we get out of this? Can't we rule them illegal? Can't we go to bankruptcy court and just beat feet out of the bill?
Well, actually, again,
we're playing into a jealousy factor that's rather enormous in this city.
Well, Alison, I wondered because Tony had brought up fees, and fees were discussed this week. San Diego's having to pay for some of the services they enjoy.
And the howling was enormous.
The howling was enormous, and many of them weren't approved, including one that actually wouldn't have affected San Diegans.
The parking fees for visitors, although they saw that as the thin end of the wedge and said, as soon as you got this, we'll have parking fees for even residents.
What did they put in place, the City Council, this week, as it's trying to reconcile the new fiscal year budget? Did they put some...
Well, the city manager came out with $3.2 million worth of increased fees to help this $50 million budget gap. And, the City Council basically balked at almost 1 million of them and said, no, we just can't face that. Mainly, as you're saying, the parking on the beach, they said, no, we can't take that one on. And the ones that they did, though, pass was some increased fees for residents who have parking districts. And some residents, like in Barrio Logan and Mission Hills in the College area, are going to see permits for parking outside their own the front of their own house jump from like $10 to $25 kind of thing. This is a fee that hasn't been increased for 10 years, and I think it's indicative of the fact that the city of San Diego just has not increased fees for over a decade, and now, boom, they're happening, and the people who are feeling them are really feeling the pain. But the City Council,
who's really going to feel the pain on that too? It's people that don't have driveways, or
the regressive kind of.
And
attacks.
another way they'll be paid, of course, is in police enforcement and towing fees.
Right. All the different services that the police provide. Whenever the police are out there doing a service, those kinds of fees are going to be really a lot bigger.
But that's it. What about land sales? There had been talk about selling off city land.
Well, that one never got docketed in the end. It sort of emerged as a result of an enterprising reporter, uncovering a memo from the asset manager to the city attorney and the mayor, saying, here are 6 possible properties that could be sold. And this was in response to Councilman Tony Young's request for let's look at land sales. When there was a big outcry about that, which we shouldn't go into all the drama that Mike Aguirre caused, but there's a big outcry, it wasn't docketed. However, Tony Young says he is hoping to still get it docketed, but in a different form. Instead of looking at 6 pieces of land particularly, it's more likely that they'll be considering the more general issue of, well, is there a strategy that we could adopt to sell land?
Good, thank you for that. On to another story. It also hinges on money and benefits. A labor strike by janitors who clean the high-tech offices in the north suburbs. And Michael Kinsman, you've been looking at this story. So what's the idea? Let the garbage pile up on Torrey Pines?
No, not at all. The janitors that do work in suburban buildings, suburban San Diego, in Torrey Pines, UTC, downtown La Jolla, Carlsbad, Mission Valley, they are paid less than janitors who do the work downtown, and they have no health benefits, whereas janitors downtown have health benefits for their families. And that's where the real issue is. It's the health benefits.
So they went on strike this week.
They did. Their contract expired on Memorial Day, and they took a vote 5 days later, and now they're starting a sort of a progressive strike where they'll strike 5 buildings on one day, and then they'll add another 5 the next day, or 10, whatever the figure is, and they'll build up. Their idea is to keep the door open to negotiation with the 8 janitorial companies they're dealing with.
Now, I heard that some of these companies that are actually affected by this janitor strike are actually in favor of paying better wages and benefits.
We don't know how many are out there. We do know that there were 2 companies that stood up this week and told the janitorial services company that serve them, we will pay for these benefits. We think these janitors should have health benefits, so let's get that done. One was Amylin Pharmaceuticals, the other was the Burnham Institute. It's going to cost those companies each tens of thousands of dollars for this, but they feel it's they're in the healthcare industry. They believe that people should have healthcare benefits, and they've took the unusual position of standing up for those workers.
And the history on this is the downtown janitors, which are also covered by the SEIU, prevailed in a previous strike.
Yes, and at that time, 2 years ago, when they got their health benefits, the suburban janitors were not as well organized. organized. There's more than 500 big buildings out there that are served by suburban janitors, and the SEIU did not represent a large number of those. They had about 1,000 people. In the past 2 years, they've added 400. They now claim to represent about 70% of the janitors in those buildings.
So they're the last ones in the whole state, I understand, not to have health insurance.
The last ones in an urban area, yes.
So, I mean, do you think
doing that kind of work? And it's like the SEIU makes the case that the rents you pay in UTC are only pennies less than the rent you pay downtown. The work they do is identical to it, so why shouldn't they have it?
So what's management going to do? Are they going to bring in strikebreakers to?
Absolutely. They already have. They have contingency plans in place. They're taking a hard line. Today, negotiations probably will break down. There's a final negotiation session. I have it on, from one party that it's not going to happen. I don't. We'll see at the end of the day what happens and how the SEIU reacts to that.
How did SEIU prevail in downtown San Diego? What tipped the balance there?
They had a critical mass, and there was precedent set in other parts of the state. 4 years ago, janitors in downtown Sacramento protested. They've protested in Silicon Valley. And as these other urban areas won benefits, it was hard for the downtown building owners and janitorial companies to draw the line.
Will the suburbanites be more retrograde? Are they just going to say, are they just going to draw the line and say no more, and we'll bring in strikebreakers?
I think that's a very good possibility. I think the SEIU is very serious at this point, whereas 2 years ago I don't think there was a sympathy among the suburban janitors that they would strike, and now they certainly will.
And quickly, Mike, I'm curious whether other unions will sort of jump in on this or not and really bring pressure to bear on the situation.
Well, I think we're seeing part of, I think they will, but I think what we're seeing is that unions are getting smart and they're going after the moral aspects. You're not providing health care benefits to people who need them. And we all know that everyone needs health care benefits. So the janitorial company is putting in a very difficult position, particularly when customers like, the Burnham Institute steps up and says, we'll pay for it. We think they should have.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Thousands of troops returned to San Diego this week, which brought smiles to lots of faces. But military boosters were putting on some sad faces Wednesday, some shock and awe, I guess, when it was announced that Marine Corps Recruit Depot, the MCRD, might be slated for closure. Tony Perry, what's up with this? The list came out earlier.
Absolutely.
MCRD wasn't on it.
Wasn't on it just when we thought it was safe to go back into the woods. Right. The Recruit Depot was not on the Pentagon's hit list. Now the Base Realignment and Closure Commission is doing their study, and various commissioners have fanned out across the nation to look at places that are slated, that are on the Pentagon list. And Anthony Principi, the board chairman, who's a Rancho Santa Fe resident and was appointed by the president to be chairman of the BRAC Commission, came to San Diego, was looking at the hospital, Balboa Naval Hospital. There's some issues there. He was looking at North Island. But in a press conference, the first thing we asked was, what about MCRD? Is it out of the woods? Is it safe? And he said, absolutely not. We're going to look at it. We want to see how it is that the Pentagon came to this decision. We want to see whether we could save some money by sending the training operations up to Pendleton.
And this was supposed to be San Diego's friend on the commission, Anthony Principi.
Well, he's, yes and no, I presume. The history of having San Diegans in high positions doesn't really lend itself to the idea they protect us, frankly.
But I can't help asking, a lot of observers are sort of saying, isn't this kind of short-sighted? Basically what San Diego needs is an airport, and MCRD would help to solve that problem. And isn't there some possibility people have been putting words in, behind the scenes?
No to the second part, because you remember the city officials hushed up the airport commission so that they would not even breathe the words Miramar or MCRD. Now, would it be good for the for Lindbergh Field? I think the reigning thought is no. That piece of property looks good, but wouldn't configure itself well. That really San Diego has to hitch its pants up and find something that isn't in downtown San Diego.
But seriously, couldn't the Marine Corps Recruitment Depot easily be moved from that property next to the airport up to Camp Pendleton and join the rest of the Marine activity up there?
That's what they're going to study. And as Anthony Principi noted, the Navy and the Air Force, both larger services in the Marine Corps, they each run one training facility. The Marine Corps, the smallest of the military services, runs two, Parris Island and San Diego. Why can't they do with one, he said.
Tony, I'm not sure how this happens. In the previous BRAC rounds, they come come out with a list of places they're going to close, and then they evaluate them further. This time, it's not on there, but all of a sudden, 3 weeks later, it magically appears.
Well, the Marine Corps has only themselves to blame. After the Pentagon list came out, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Mike Hagee, who's at Pendleton for a number of years now, is the top dog in the Marine Corps, goes to the commission and just almost casually says, oh, by the way, we recommended that MCRD be closed. Then we studied it a little further and we backed off from it. Well, at that point, MCRD really is back in play. I don't know whether the general rued the day he said that or whether he's got some issues going. I don't know. But that's what Principi is reacting to.
And much more processed yet to come.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, that's all the time we have for tonight's show. You can learn more about the stories we talked about tonight. Go to the website, kpbs.org. And, of course, we appreciate hearing from you. Write to us at the address on the screen. Okay, thanks to our guests, Tony Perry and Alison St John, Jennifer Vigil and Michael Kinsman. And join us again here on Monday's Full Focus. We'll have the latest KPBS Competitive Edge Research poll that looks at what the public thinks about the city's financial crisis. And we'll ask some local experts if we really are America's cheapest city. We'll hope you join us for that, and have a great weekend. I'm Michael Marcotte.